Hi, I'm Claire Bennett. 3 weeks ago, my brother live-streamed me carrying dirty dishes to 200,000 people, calling my job pathetic while I served tables at the Copper Kettle. He zoomed in on my apron stains. He made fun of the way I smiled at customers. He even tipped me a single penny and filmed my reaction. His followers flooded the comments with laughing emojis and cruel jokes about how far I'd fallen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I wanted to disappear into the floor. But that wasn't the lowest moment. The lowest moment came when my own mother showed up at the restaurant, not to defend me, but to ask me to stop embarrassing the family by making a scene. She said I should be grateful Derek was even acknowledging my existence. I stood there in that kitchen doorway, flour on my shirt and tears burning behind my eyes, thinking this was my life now. Invisible. Disposable. The punchline to someone else's content. Then my grandfather's lawyer called. 1 week later, I sat in a mahogany conference room watching my brother's face drain of color as the will was read. And that's when everything changed. I should have known better than to think things would go smoothly that Tuesday afternoon. The lunch rush at the Copper Kettle had finally died down, and I was wiping tables near the window when Nina poked her head out from the kitchen. She was my manager, but more than that, she'd become something close to a friend over the past year. She had this way of reading people that made you feel seen, even when you were trying to hide. "You good out here?" she asked, her dark eyes scanning the nearly empty dining room. I nodded, tossing the rag into my apron pocket. The usual chaos had settled into that peaceful lull between lunch and dinner service. Just a couple lingering over coffee in the corner booth and an older gentleman reading his newspaper by the bar. This was my favorite part of the day, when I could actually breathe and remember why I'd taken this job in the first place. Portland in late August was beautiful. The afternoon light came through our big front windows in golden streams, catching the copper accents throughout the restaurant that gave the place its name. Outside, people strolled past in sundresses and short sleeves, heading toward the waterfront or ducking into the boutiques that lined our street. The Copper Kettle sat right in the heart of downtown, the kind of place where tourists and locals mixed over craft cocktails and farm-to-table dishes that Nina's husband created in our kitchen. I'd been working here for almost 14 months. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and after everything that had happened with my family, honest work felt like a luxury. My apartment in the Pearl District was small, barely 500 square feet, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could tell me I didn't deserve it. Every night when I came home with aching feet and the smell of garlic in my hair, I felt something my childhood mansion had never given me. Peace. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Vanessa, one of the other servers who'd become a real friend. She had the evening shift and was checking if I wanted to grab drinks after she got off. I was typing back a response when the door chimed. I looked up out of habit, ready to greet whoever had just walked in, and my stomach dropped. Derek stood in the doorway, his phone already raised and pointed directly at me. That stupid ring light he always carried was clipped to the top of his phone, making him look like some kind of discount television crew. He was grinning, that practiced smile he used for his followers, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Hey everyone," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "We're here at the Copper Kettle in downtown Portland, and look who's working today. My little sister Claire." He swept the phone around to capture the interior of the restaurant before swinging it back to me. "She's been telling the family she's doing great, really thriving in her new independent life. So let's see how that's going, shall we?" My face went hot. The couple in the corner booth looked up, confused. The man with the newspaper lowered it slightly, his expression uncomfortable. Nina had frozen in the kitchen doorway, her jaw tight. I wanted to say something, to tell him to leave, but my throat had closed up. This was Derek's specialty. He knew exactly how to catch people off guard, how to create moments that felt too awkward to disrupt. He walked toward me, still filming, his designer sneakers squeaking slightly on our polished concrete floors. He was dressed like he always was these days, in clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent but were styled to look casual. Ripped jeans that had been ripped by someone in a factory, a vintage band t-shirt that he'd never listened to, a leather jacket that he'd bought distressed. Everything about him was manufactured, curated for maximum engagement. "So Claire," he said, pushing the phone closer to my face. "How's the waitress life treating you? Making those big tips?" He laughed, and I could see the comments already flying across his screen. He'd probably already gotten 100 notifications. His followers lived for this kind of content, the manufactured drama, the family tension played out for entertainment. I glanced at Nina. She was already moving toward us, her manager face on, but I shook my head slightly. The last thing I needed was to make this worse by causing a scene. Derek would love that. He'd film every second, edit it into a viral moment, paint me as the unstable one. I'd learned that lesson already. "Derek," I said quietly, keeping my voice level. "I'm working. You need to leave." He tilted his head, his expression mockingly sympathetic. "Working, right. That's what we're calling this." He panned the camera around again, making sure to capture my stained apron, the tray of dirty dishes I'd left on the server station, the slightly frazzled state of my hair. "You know, everyone back home asks about you. Mom, Dad, they always want to know how you're doing. And I tell them, well, Claire's really making something of herself. Really climbing that ladder." The sarcasm was so thick I could taste it. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together in front of me, trying to maintain some composure. Behind Derek, I saw Nina on the phone. She was probably calling the owner, or maybe even the police if Derek didn't leave soon. The older gentleman had set down his newspaper entirely now, watching with the kind of concern that made me feel even more exposed. "I'm doing fine," I managed to say. "And I need you to respect that I'm at work." Derek snorted. "Respect? That's rich." He turned the camera back to himself, addressing his audience directly. "You guys remember when Claire used to have that trust fund? When she was supposed to take over part of Grandpa Harold's business? Yeah, that was before she decided she knew better than everyone. Before she threw it all away to prove some kind of point." He made air quotes with his free hand. "Now she's serving other people their lunch. Inspiring stuff, right?" Something cracked inside me. Maybe it was the way he said my grandfather's name, so casual and dismissive, like Harold Bennett hadn't been the only person in our family who'd ever really seen me. Maybe it was the knowledge that hundreds of thousands of people were watching this, judging me, laughing at me. Or maybe it was just that I was tired. So incredibly tired of being the joke. "You don't know anything about why I left," I said, and my voice came out harder than I'd intended. Derek's eyebrows shot up. He loved this. This was the reaction he'd been fishing for. "Oh, we're getting spicy now." He turned the phone to capture my expression. "Come on, Claire. Share with the class. Why did you leave? Was it because you couldn't handle the pressure? Because you thought you were too good for the family business? Or was it because you've always been a little too sensitive for the real world?" Each question felt like a slap. My mother had asked me similar things 2 years ago when I'd told her I couldn't do it anymore, couldn't pretend to be part of a family that only valued me for what I could do for them. She'd called me ungrateful. My father had called me foolish. And Derek had started a whole series of social media posts about entitled millennials who didn't appreciate what they had. I'd become content for him even then. "I'm not doing this with you," I said, turning away. Derek followed me, the camera still rolling. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just checking in on my little sister. Making sure she's okay. You look tired, by the way. Are they working you too hard here?" He reached out and plucked at my apron. "These stains really add to the ambience. Very authentic." That's when Nina stepped in. She moved between us with the kind of authority that came from years of dealing with difficult customers. "Sir," she said, her voice polite but inflexible. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're disrupting our business and harassing my employee." Derek turned the camera to her. "Oh, we've got management involved now. This is great content." He grinned at his phone. "See, this is what happens when you try to support family. You get threatened with removal." Nina didn't flinch. "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you. Either you leave now, or I call the police for trespassing. Your choice." For a long moment, Derek just stood there, still filming. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out which option would give him better content. Finally, he lowered the phone slightly, though he didn't turn off the camera. "Fine," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I can see when I'm not wanted." He looked at me, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Something that might have been genuine emotion, though I couldn't tell if it was hurt or anger or satisfaction. But before I leave, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a penny. He set it on the nearest table with an exaggerated flourish. "For your excellent service, sis." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Don't spend it all in one place. Then he was gone, the door chiming behind him as he walked out into the bright afternoon. Through the window, I could see him still talking to his phone, probably already captioning the video, already watching the views climb. My legs felt weak. I sank into the nearest chair, my head in my hands. Nina was beside me immediately. "You okay?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. Even though I could feel the walls of the restaurant pressing in on me, could imagine all those people watching the video, leaving comments, sharing it with their friends. By tonight, it would probably have 1 million views. By tomorrow, I'd be a trending topic. The cautionary tale of what happens when you reject your family's wealth. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Nina squeezed my shoulder. "You have nothing to be sorry for. That was harassment, plain and simple. We should file a report." I shook my head. "He's my brother. It'll just make things worse. Besides, what are the police going to do? He didn't threaten me. He just humiliated me in front of his entire audience. That's not actually a crime." The older gentleman approached our table. He'd folded his newspaper and was holding it under one arm. "Excuse me," he said gently. I couldn't help but overhear. "That young man, is he really your brother?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The man's expression was kind, sympathetic in a way that made my throat tight. "I'm sorry you had to experience that. For what it's worth, I've been coming to this restaurant for 5 years. You've always provided excellent service." Whatever he was trying to prove, he only proved what kind of person he is. "Not you." It was such a small thing, that validation from a stranger, but it cracked something open inside me. I managed to thank him before he left, pressing a generous tip into my hand as he went. Nina insisted I take the rest of the day off, said she'd cover my tables herself. I protested weakly, but she wasn't having it. "Go home," she said firmly. "Take care of yourself. Tomorrow is another day." I walked back to my apartment in a daze, barely seeing the streets around me. My phone was buzzing constantly now. Notifications from people I hadn't spoken to in years, former friends who'd seen Derek's video and were reaching out with various mixtures of concern and curiosity. A few messages from numbers I didn't recognize, followers of Derek's who'd somehow found my contact information. Most of those messages I didn't even open. I could guess what they said. My studio apartment had never felt smaller. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a long moment, staring at the space I'd been so proud of just hours earlier. Now it felt like exactly what Derek had implied it was. A downgrade. A failure. Evidence of how far I'd fallen from the Bennett family standards. I sat on my bed, which was also my couch, and finally let myself cry. Not the pretty kind of crying from movies, but the ugly, gasping kind that comes from somewhere deep and painful. I cried for the family I'd thought I had, the one I'd realized didn't actually exist. I cried for my grandfather, who'd died 6 months ago and taken with him the only person who'd ever made me feel like I was enough just as I was. And I cried for myself, for the girl who'd been so sure that walking away was the brave choice, who was now wondering if maybe everyone had been right and she'd just been too proud to see it. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But it was a Portland number I didn't recognize, and something made me pick up. Hello? My voice came out rough, raw from crying. Miss Bennett? The voice on the other end was professional, male, unfamiliar. This is Thomas Whitmore from Whitmore and Associates. I'm the attorney handling your grandfather Harold Bennett's estate. My heart stuttered. I sat up straighter, wiping at my face even though he couldn't see me. Yes, that's me. There's been some delay in settling the estate, Mr. Whitmore continued. Some complications with the will that we needed to sort through. But we're ready now to proceed with the reading. I was hoping you could come to our offices next Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. The address is downtown, near Pioneer Square. I'll be there, I said, my mind racing. Is everything okay? Is there a problem? Mr. Whitmore's voice was carefully neutral. I think it's best if we discuss the details in person, Miss Bennett. I will say that your presence is essential. There are some provisions in your grandfather's will that specifically concern you. We'll need you there to proceed. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment, watching the last light fade from my single window. My grandfather's will. I hadn't even known if I'd be included. After I'd left the family, after all the arguments and accusations, I'd assumed I'd been written out of everything. That had been fine with me. I hadn't left for the money. I'd left because staying was killing me slowly, turning me into someone I didn't recognize. But now, with the reading scheduled, I felt something stirring in my chest. Not hope, exactly. More like curiosity. My grandfather had always been different from the rest of them. He'd built his restaurant empire from nothing, starting with a single diner in Northeast Portland back in the 70s. He'd worked every job there was, from dishwasher to cook to manager, before he'd saved enough to buy the place. Then he'd done it again, and again, until he owned 15 restaurants across Oregon and Washington. He'd never looked down on honest work. Never treated service industry jobs like they were beneath anyone. Some of my best memories were of him taking me to his restaurants when I was little, introducing me to his staff like they were family, showing me how every single role mattered. He'd made me feel like I could be anything. Like my worth wasn't determined by my last name or my trust fund balance. I thought about Derek's video, probably still racking up views. I thought about my mother asking me to stop embarrassing the family. I thought about that penny sitting on the table at the Copper Kettle. And then I thought about Tuesday, about walking into that lawyer's office, about whatever my grandfather had left for me in his will. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a final message. Maybe it was something I couldn't even imagine yet. But for the first time since Derek had walked through that restaurant door, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt like maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet. My grandfather had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Even when the rest of the family had written me off as the disappointing daughter who'd thrown away her future. Whatever he'd put in that will, whatever he'd wanted to say to me, I owed it to him to show up and listen. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new message to Nina. I typed quickly, before I could second-guess myself. Thank you for today. For defending me. For being exactly who you are. I need Tuesday afternoon off, if that's possible. I have something I need to take care of. Something that might change everything. I hit send and closed the laptop. Outside my window, Portland's city lights were beginning to glow. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably celebrating his viral video, counting his new followers, planning his next piece of content. My parents were probably mortified that I'd made a scene, that Nina had threatened to call the police. They were probably calling each other right now, discussing what to do about their difficult daughter. Let them talk. Let them judge. Tuesday was coming, and something told me that when I walked out of that lawyer's office, nothing was going to be the same. The days between that phone call and Tuesday crawled by like honey dripping from a spoon. I went through the motions at work, smiling at customers, taking orders, clearing plates, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Vanessa noticed first. She cornered me during a lull on Thursday evening, her arms crossed over her chest in that way that meant she wasn't letting me dodge the conversation. "You've been weird since Tuesday," she said bluntly. Vanessa had never been one for subtlety, which was one of the things I loved about her. "Want to talk about it?" I wiped down the bar, buying myself a moment to think. The video Derek posted had gotten worse, not better. It had over 3 million views now, and the comments section was a nightmare I couldn't stop reading even though every word felt like a knife. People I'd never met had opinions about my life, my choices, my worth as a human being. "My brother came in and filmed me," I said finally. "Made a whole thing about how pathetic my life is. Posted it online." Vanessa's expression darkened. "That douche with the ring light?" I wanted to kick him out myself, but Nina beat me to it. She paused, studying my face. "But that's not what's eating at you right now, is it?" Sometimes I forgot how well she could read people. Vanessa had been working at the Copper Kettle for 3 years, putting herself through community college while raising her younger sister after their parents passed away in a car accident. She understood complicated family dynamics in a way that made her impossible to lie to. "My grandfather's lawyer called," I admitted. "There's a will reading on Tuesday. I don't know what to expect. I haven't seen most of my family since I left 2 years ago." Vanessa leaned against the bar, processing this. "Your grandfather, he was the good one, right? The one you actually liked?" I nodded, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. Harold Bennett had been more than good. He'd been my refuge, my champion, the only person in my entire family who'd supported my decision to leave. When everyone else had called me ungrateful and foolish, he'd taken me to lunch at one of his restaurants and told me he was proud of me. That it took real courage to choose your own path, especially when everyone around you was trying to pave a different one. "He died 6 months ago," I said quietly. "Heart attack. Quick, at least. He didn't suffer." I paused, swallowing hard. I went to the funeral, but I stayed in the back. Didn't talk to anyone. My mother saw me and turned away like I was a stranger. My father pretended I wasn't there. And Derek took a selfie with the casket and posted it with some caption about legacy and family values. "That's messed up," Vanessa said, her voice gentle. "But also very on brand for what you've told me about them." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens Tuesday, you've got people here who've got your back. You know that, right?" I did know it, and that knowledge was the only thing keeping me steady. The family I'd found in Portland, the one I'd built from friendships and shared shifts and late-night conversations over cheap wine, they were more real than anything I'd left behind in that big house in Lakewood Heights. Friday brought a new complication. I was opening the restaurant, arriving at 6 in the morning to help prep for the breakfast service, when I found my mother waiting outside. She was dressed in one of her signature outfits, cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I made in a week, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. The sight of her standing there, so out of place against the industrial backdrop of our delivery entrance, made my stomach clench. "Claire," she said when she saw me. "We need to talk." I fumbled with my keys, my hands suddenly clumsy. "Mom, I'm working. I don't have time for this." She followed me as I unlocked the door and stepped into the dark restaurant. The smell of yesterday's cooking still lingered faintly in the air. I flipped on the lights, flooding the space with harsh fluorescent brightness. "This will only take a moment," she insisted, her heels clicking on the floor as she tracked me toward the kitchen. "I've been trying to reach you, but you haven't been answering my calls." I started pulling out prep containers, focusing on the familiar routine. "That's because I have nothing to say to you. Not after you showed up here last week and told me I was embarrassing the family." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "You were making a scene. That boy was simply trying to connect with you, and you had your manager threaten him. That boy is 28 years old and has 200,000 followers who watched him humiliate me for content." I turned to face her fully, the container still in my hands. He tipped me a penny, Mom. On camera. And you think I was the one making a scene? She waved a hand dismissively, as if the entire incident was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. Derek has always been theatrical. You're too sensitive. But that's not why I'm here. She smoothed her blouse, gathering herself. I heard you received a call from Thomas Whitmore. About your grandfather's will. There it was. The real reason for this visit. Of course she knew about the lawyer's call. Of course she'd come to manage the situation, to try to control whatever was about to happen. My mother had spent her entire life orchestrating things, arranging people and circumstances like flowers in a vase, always positioning everything to look perfect from the outside. What about it? I asked, my voice flat. She took a breath, and I saw something flicker across her face. Worry, maybe. Or calculation. It was always hard to tell with her. Your grandfather was not in his right mind toward the end. The heart condition, the medications, they affected his judgment. Whatever is in that will, whatever he may have said or promised, you need to understand that it doesn't reflect the family's wishes or best interests. I set down the container with more force than necessary. Let me get this straight. You're here to tell me that if Grandpa Harold left me anything, I shouldn't accept it? My mother's eyes narrowed. I'm here to remind you that you walked away from this family. You made that choice very clear. You can't have it both ways, Claire. You can't reject everything we stand for and then come back with your hand out when there's money involved. The accusation stung, probably because some small, stupid part of me wondered if she was right. But then I remembered my grandfather's face the last time I'd seen him, 3 weeks before he died. I'd visited him at his house, bringing soup from the copper kettle that Nina had made special. He'd been weak but clear-headed, and he'd held my hand and told me he was sorry. Sorry for not doing more to protect me from the rest of them, sorry for not standing up louder when I'd needed him to. I'm not coming back for money, I said quietly. I'm going because a lawyer called and said I needed to be there. That's it. My mother studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. This is our family attorney, Gerald Stevenson. If you need legal representation at the reading, someone to look out for your actual interests, call him. He'll make sure you're not taken advantage of. I didn't take the card. Mom, why are you really here? What are you so worried about? She slipped the card back into her purse, her movements precise and controlled. I'm not worried about anything. I simply want you to be prepared. Your grandfather had some unconventional ideas toward the end. There may be conditions, stipulations, things designed to manipulate you into coming back. I want you to remember that you have choices. You don't have to accept anything that compromises who you've decided to be. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd gotten from her in 2 years. The implicit admission that maybe, possibly, I had become someone on my own terms. But it was wrapped in so many layers of warning and control that I couldn't tell if she was trying to protect me or protect herself. I'll keep that in mind, I said, turning back to my prep work. Nina will be here soon. You should go. My mother lingered for another moment, and I felt her gaze on my back. Then, softly, she said, he loved you very much, you know. Your grandfather. Sometimes I think he loved you more than he loved the rest of us. Maybe because you reminded him of who he used to be. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at her, if I saw whatever expression was on her face, I might crack open completely. I heard her footsteps retreating, the click of the door as she left. Only then did I let myself breathe, let my shoulders sag, let the weight of that conversation settle over me like a heavy blanket. Nina found me 20 minutes later, still standing in the same spot, staring at nothing. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just handed me a knife and pointed me toward a pile of vegetables that needed chopping. We worked in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of prep slowly bringing me back to myself. The weekend passed in a blur of shifts and sleepless nights. I kept checking Derek's social media, torturing myself with updates. He'd posted 3 more videos since Tuesday, none of them about me directly, but his follower count had jumped by 50,000. The penny video, as people were calling it, had been picked up by several reaction channels and commentary accounts. I'd become a cautionary tale, a symbol of millennial entitlement and wasted privilege, even though none of these people knew the actual story. Saturday night, Vanessa dragged me out for drinks after our shift. We went to a dive bar in southeast Portland, the kind of place with sticky floors and a jukebox that only played songs from the 90s. It was exactly what I needed, anonymous and uncomplicated. "So Tuesday," she said, nursing her whiskey sour. "What's your game plan?" I shrugged, picking at the label on my beer bottle. "Show up. Listen. Try not to let my family get to me." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "That's not a plan. That's hoping for the best. What if they try to intimidate you? What if there's some clause that requires you to do something you don't want to do?" "Then I walk away," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. I couldn't walk away from my grandfather's last wishes, whatever they were. I owed him more than that. He'd been the only one who'd never asked me to be anyone other than myself. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression serious. "Listen, I don't know your family except for what you've told me and what I saw with that jackass brother of yours. But I know you. And I know you've spent 2 years building a life that makes you happy, or at least happier than you were before. Don't let them take that away from you, no matter what's in that will." I raised my beer bottle. "To not letting them take it away." She clinked her glass against mine. "To not letting them take it away. And to your grandpa, who clearly saw something in you that the rest of them were too stupid to notice." Monday morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I pulled out the box from the top shelf of my closet, the one I'd shoved up there when I'd moved in and tried to forget about. Inside were remnants of my old life. Photos from family vacations where everyone smiled for the camera but barely spoke to each other between shots. My college diploma from Reed, the one I'd earned while my parents complained that I should have gone to Stanford like Derek. A few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had given me before she passed, back when I was still young enough to be considered promising rather than disappointing. At the bottom of the box was a letter. I'd read it so many times in the weeks after my grandfather's death that I'd memorized every word, but I pulled it out anyway, unfolding the heavy paper with careful fingers. He'd written it 6 months before he died, when he must have known his time was running out. "My dearest Claire," it began in his distinctive handwriting, slightly shaky but still legible. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you know how proud I was to call you my granddaughter. You have something the rest of this family forgot they ever had, integrity. You'd rather serve others honestly than exploit them dishonestly, and that makes you richer than all their bank accounts combined. I'm leaving you something in my will. I can't tell you what yet, there are complications, legalities, things that need to be sorted. But I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever anyone else says, you earned this. Not because of your last name, but because of who you chose to become when you had every reason to become someone else. Don't let them bully you. Don't let them convince you that you're wrong for choosing dignity over dynasty. You remind me of myself at your age, before I got tired, before I compromised too many times in the name of family peace. You're what I should have been. All my love, Grandpa Harold." I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Tomorrow, when I walked into that conference room, when I faced my family for the first time in 2 years, I'd have his words with me. His belief in me. It wouldn't make it easy, but it might make it possible. That night, I laid out my clothes for the meeting. I didn't have much that qualified as professional anymore. Most of my nice things from my old life had been sold or donated. But I had one good dress, navy blue and simple, that I'd bought for job interviews back when I'd first moved to Portland. I paired it with the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me, the ones my mother had once tried to claim for herself. Looking at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back. 2 years ago, I'd been softer, more uncertain, always looking for approval from people who would never give it. Now I was lean from long shifts on my feet, my hands strong from carrying trays and dealing with the physical demands of restaurant work. My face was bare of the heavy makeup I used to wear, and my hair was pulled back in a simple style that was practical rather than fashionable. I looked like someone who worked for a living. Someone who'd chosen substance over appearance. And for the first time, looking at that reflection, I felt something close to pride. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray, typical October weather in Portland. I walked to the law offices, needing the time to clear my head. Thomas Whitmore's firm was housed in a historic building near Pioneer Square, all red brick and tall windows. The lobby was understated but expensive, the kind of place that whispered old money rather than shouting it. The receptionist directed me to the third floor, where a paralegal met me and led me down a hallway lined with dark wood paneling. Through an open door, I caught a glimpse of a conference room, and my steps faltered. They were all there. My mother, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit. My father, looking older than I remembered, his hair fully gray now. And Derek, dressed up for once in actual business attire, though he still had his phone in his hand. "Miss Bennett," the paralegal said gently, noticing my hesitation. "Mr. Whitmore is ready for you. This way, please." I followed her into the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mother's eyes met mine for just a second before sliding away. My father nodded curtly, an acknowledgement that could have meant anything or nothing. Derek didn't look up from his phone, though I saw his jaw tighten. There were two other people in the room I didn't recognize. An older woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, and a younger man in an expensive suit who had the look of an attorney. Thomas Whitmore himself sat at the head of the table, a neat stack of documents in front of him. He was in his 60s, distinguished in that way that came from years of handling sensitive matters for wealthy families. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice carrying the weight of formality. "I know this hasn't been easy, especially given the family circumstances. But Harold Bennett was very specific about his wishes, and it's my duty to execute them exactly as he intended." He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each of us in turn. "Before we begin, I need to introduce two witnesses to this proceeding. This is Margaret Chen, who served as Mr. Bennett's personal accountant for 30 years, and James Morrison, his business attorney." The woman with gray hair nodded. The man in the expensive suit raised his hand slightly. I noticed my father shift uncomfortably in his seat. Whatever was coming, he clearly wasn't prepared for witnesses who knew the full scope of my grandfather's business dealings. Thomas Whitmore opened the folder in front of him and pulled out a thick document. "This is the last will and testament of Harold James Bennett, executed 8 months ago with sound mind and body, in the presence of these witnesses and myself." He cleared his throat and began to read. The first section dealt with personal effects, items distributed among various family members and longtime employees. My mother received his collection of first edition cookbooks. My father got his vintage car collection. Derek was left his watch collection, though I saw him frown when the monetary value was specified as being far less than he'd probably hoped. Various staff members at his restaurants received generous cash bequests and sentimental items. Then Thomas Whitmore turned the page, and the atmosphere in the room changed. I felt it like a physical shift, the way the air gets heavy before a storm. "To my granddaughter, Claire Elizabeth Bennett," he read, and my mother's back went rigid. "I leave the following, knowing that she is the only member of my family who understands what these gifts truly mean." I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Every eye in the room had turned to me, and I felt pinned under their collective gaze like a butterfly on display. "First," Whitmore continued, "I leave her the Copper Kettle restaurant, located at 412 Southwest Morrison Street, Portland, Oregon, free and clear of all debts and encumbrances. The property, the business, and all assets associated with it are hers to manage, develop, or sell as she sees fit." "Wait," my mother said sharply, breaking the formal atmosphere. "The Copper Kettle? That's impossible. Father promised that property to the family trust." Thomas Whitmore looked at her over his reading glasses. "Mrs. Bennett, I'll ask you to please hold your questions until I've finished reading the will. But to address your immediate concern, Harold Bennett owned the Copper Kettle personally. It was never part of the family trust, and he was free to bequeath it to whomever he chose." I felt dizzy. The Copper Kettle, the place where I'd worked for over a year, where I'd found purpose and friendship and a kind of peace I'd never known in my family's world, had been my grandfather's all along. And now it was mine. But Whitmore wasn't finished. In addition, he continued, I leave Claire my recipe collection, including all proprietary recipes developed during my 50 years in the restaurant industry. These recipes, which represent the foundation of the Bennett culinary legacy, are hers to use or protect as she deems appropriate. Furthermore, I establish for Claire a trust fund in the amount of $800,000, to be used for the expansion or improvement of the Copper Kettle, or for any other business purposes she deems fit. This trust is hers alone, with no conditions or oversight from other family members. My father made a sound somewhere between a cough and a protest. 800,000, he muttered. That's more than, he stopped himself, but everyone knew what he'd been about to say. More than he'd left anyone else. Finally, Whitmore said, and his voice took on a different quality, something softer and sadder, Harold Bennett included a letter to be read aloud at this proceeding. He specified that all family members must be present to hear it. He paused, looking around the room. I believe everyone is here, so I'll proceed. He pulled out another sheet of paper, this one in my grandfather's handwriting, and began to read. To my family, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone, and Claire is sitting in that room probably looking like she wants to disappear. Claire, sweetheart, don't. You deserve to be there more than anyone. The rest of you need to hear this, because I won't be around anymore to say it to your faces. I built my business from nothing. I washed dishes, I scrubbed floors, I worked 80-hour weeks for years before I could afford to buy my first restaurant. I did it because I loved the work, because I believed in creating something that mattered, something that brought people together over good food and honest service. Somewhere along the way, this family forgot that. You forgot that wealth is a responsibility, not a right. You forgot that people matter more than profit. You forgot that there's dignity in all honest work, whether you're serving food or running a company. Claire didn't forget. When she walked away from your expectations, your demands, your shallow values, she showed more courage than the rest of you combined. She chose to work at the Copper Kettle not because she had to, but because she wanted to understand what I'd always tried to teach you. That real success isn't about how much money you make or how many people know your name. It's about whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and respect what you see. I'm leaving her the Copper Kettle because she's the only one who will treat it with the respect it deserves. The only one who understands that those staff members, those recipes, that tradition of service, they mean something beyond their monetary value. Richard, Patricia, you raised a daughter who has more integrity in her little finger than you've shown in decades of social climbing and image management. Derek, you've turned family drama into entertainment and ambition into cruelty. You should all be ashamed. Claire, my dear, don't let them make you doubt yourself. Don't let them convince you that what I'm giving you is charity or pity. You've earned every bit of this through your choices, your character, your willingness to do hard work without complaint. The Copper Kettle is yours because I trust you to carry on what I started, to remember why it matters. Do whatever you want with it. Make it your own. Just remember that real legacy isn't about money or property. It's about the lives you touch and the example you set. I love you. Make me proud. Not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. The room was absolutely silent when Thomas Whitmore finished reading. I couldn't see clearly, my vision blurred with tears I was trying desperately not to let fall. My grandfather's words, his final gift, hung in the air like something sacred and terrible all at once. My mother was the first to break the silence. Her voice came out tight and controlled, the way it always did when she was furious but trying to maintain appearances. This is absolutely unacceptable. She stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Harold was clearly not in his right mind when he wrote this. The medications, the stress of his condition, anyone can see this will is the product of diminished capacity. Thomas Whitmore set down the letter with deliberate care. Mrs. Bennett, I can assure you that your father was thoroughly evaluated by 2 independent physicians before executing this will. Both certified his mental competence. Additionally, the witnesses present can attest to his clarity of mind and purpose. He gestured toward Margaret Chen and James Morrison. This will is ironclad. My father had remained seated, but his face had gone an alarming shade of red. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? He wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was looking at me, his eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, and he gives it to you. The one who walked away. The one who threw it all back in our faces. I didn't throw anything, I said quietly, finding my voice for the first time since the reading began. I just stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. My father's laugh was bitter and sharp. Oh, spare us the noble sacrifice story. You couldn't handle the pressure, so you ran away and convinced yourself it was some kind of moral stance. And now you're being rewarded for it. He shook his head in disgust. Your grandfather was a sentimental fool at the end. Don't you dare, I said, my voice rising before I could stop it. Don't you dare talk about him like that. He built everything you've lived off of for your entire adult life. Every penny you've spent, every opportunity you've had, it came from his work. His actual work, not just managing the money he made. Derek finally looked up from his phone. Oh, this is rich. Little Claire, the martyr, getting defensive. Tell me, sis, how long have you known about this? How long have you been playing the poor struggling waitress while you knew you were getting a restaurant and almost $1 million? The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I had no idea. I looked at Thomas Whitmore, desperate for confirmation. I swear, I didn't know any of this. I didn't even know if I'd be in the will at all. She's telling the truth, Whitmore said firmly. Claire was informed only that her presence was required at the reading. She had no knowledge of the contents of the will. Unlike some people in this room, he added, his gaze sweeping past my parents, who had apparently been making inquiries and assumptions for months. My mother gathered her purse, her movements jerky and agitated. We're contesting this. Gerald Stevenson will file papers by the end of the week. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in her face that might have been hurt underneath the anger. You always were his favorite. Even when you were ungrateful, even when you turned your back on everything we taught you, he still chose you over the rest of us. Maybe that should tell you something, I said softly. Maybe it should make you wonder why. But my mother was already walking toward the door, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. My father followed, pausing only to lean down and say in a low voice meant just for me, you're going to regret this. You think you can run a business? You think you're capable of managing what your grandfather built? You'll run it into the ground within a year, and then you'll come crawling back. Then I guess you have nothing to worry about, I replied, meeting his eyes. You can watch it all fall apart from a distance. He straightened, his jaw working like he wanted to say more, but Derek was already at the door, holding it open. My brother gave me one last look, and this time there was no mockery in his expression. Just something cold and calculating that made me think this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. When the door closed behind them, the room felt like it had expanded, like I could finally breathe properly for the first time since I'd walked in. Margaret Chin, the accountant, came around the table and sat down beside me. Your grandfather talked about you constantly, she said, her voice gentle. In our meetings, during planning sessions, he'd always find a way to bring up something you'd said or done. He was so proud when you started working at the Copper Kettle. Said it proved everything he'd always believed about you. I wiped at my eyes, not caring anymore who saw me cry. I didn't know it was his. All this time, I'd been working there, and I had no idea. Margaret smiled. He wanted it that way. He said you needed to find your own path without any interference from the family. Without anyone telling you what to do or who to be. The Copper Kettle was his first restaurant, you know. The one he built from nothing. It was always special to him. James Morrison, the business attorney, pulled out another folder. There's more we need to discuss regarding the business assets and operations. The restaurant has been running at a profit for the past 5 years under current management. Your grandfather's instructions were that the existing staff should be retained and that you should take whatever time you need to learn the business side of operations before making any major decisions. Thomas Whitmore nodded in agreement. Harold was very thorough in his planning. He's also left detailed notes about his other restaurants, his business philosophy, his relationships with suppliers and staff. Everything you need to understand how he built his empire. He slid a leather-bound journal across the table toward me. This was his personal business diary. He wanted you to have it. I picked up the journal with trembling hands. The leather was worn smooth from years of handling, and when I opened it, I saw page after page of my grandfather's handwriting. Notes about recipes, observations about customer service, reflections on management decisions. It was like holding a piece of his mind, his thought process made tangible. What about the contest? I asked, looking up at the lawyers. My mother said they're going to challenge the will. Is that something I need to worry about? Margaret and James exchanged a glance, and I saw something pass between them. Margaret spoke first, her tone matter of fact. Let them try. Your grandfather anticipated this possibility. That's why he had such extensive documentation of his mental state, why he had multiple witnesses, why he made sure every single detail was legally sound. Any contest will be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unsuccessful. James leaned forward, his expression serious. However, I want to be clear about something. Your family is going to make this difficult for you. They're going to try to undermine your confidence, spread rumors about your capability, possibly even attempt to interfere with the restaurant's operations. Your grandfather was aware of these possibilities and made provisions to protect you legally. But emotionally, that's something you'll have to navigate on your own. I thought about Derek's calculating look, my father's threat, my mother's barely concealed fury. They weren't going to just accept this and move on. The will reading was just the beginning of whatever battle they were preparing to wage. But I also thought about my grandfather's letter, his belief in me, his trust that I could handle not just the restaurant but everything that came with it. I can do this, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I don't know how yet, and I'm probably going to make mistakes, but I can figure it out. Margaret patted my hand. That's exactly what your grandfather said you'd say. He told me, Claire won't run from this. She'll be scared, but she'll face it head on. That's who she is. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, signing documents, transferring deeds and titles and accounts. My head swam with numbers and legal terminology, but both Margaret and James were patient, explaining everything in detail, making sure I understood each step. By the time we finished, the gray morning had given way to afternoon sun streaming through the conference room windows. Thomas Whitmore walked me to the elevator, carrying a briefcase full of documents that were now my responsibility. Before I left, he said, stopping me with a hand on my arm. I've been practicing law for 35 years. I've handled hundreds of estates, thousands of family disputes. I can tell you with absolute certainty that what your grandfather did, leaving his legacy to you the way he did, that took courage. He knew exactly what kind of firestorm it would create. He did it anyway because he believed in you more than he feared their reaction. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because in about 3 days, when the reality of what you've taken on really hits you, when your family has had time to regroup and start their campaign against you, you're going to doubt yourself. You're going to wonder if you deserve this or if you're capable of living up to it. He squeezed my arm gently. When that moment comes, and it will come, remember that a man who built an empire from nothing looked at you and saw himself. Saw the best parts of himself. That's not something you can fake or imagine. That's real. The elevator ride down felt surreal. I watched the numbers descending and thought about how much had changed in just a few hours. This morning I'd been Claire Bennett, waitress, struggling to make rent and trying to build a life independent from my family's money and expectations. Now I was Claire Bennett, restaurant owner, trustee of a substantial fund, inheritor of a culinary legacy that spanned 5 decades. The lobby was busier than it had been that morning, full of people in business attire moving with purpose and confidence. I wondered if any of them could tell just by looking at me that my entire world had shifted on its axis. But of course they couldn't. I looked exactly the same as I had walking in. It was everything else that had changed. I pulled out my phone and saw 17 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 5 from my father, 7 from Derek, and 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. There were text messages too, but I couldn't bring myself to read them yet. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand what I was feeling. Vanessa answered on the second ring. "So?" she said without preamble. "How bad was it?" I stepped out onto the street, letting the cool autumn air wash over me. "He left me the copper kettle." There was a long pause. "Wait, what? Your grandfather owned our restaurant? Why didn't anyone tell you?" Apparently he wanted me to find my own way there. To choose it without knowing. I started walking, not sure where I was going but needing to move. He left me the building, the business, everything. Plus $800,000 in a trust fund and his entire recipe collection. And a letter basically calling out my entire family for being shallow and materialistic. Vanessa let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's actually incredible. And also kind of terrifying." "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm going to throw up," I admitted. Like I just inherited a responsibility I'm completely unprepared for. Like my family is going to destroy me for this. I paused at a crosswalk, watching people stream past in both directions. Like maybe my grandfather saw something in me that I'm not sure actually exists. "Stop," Vanessa said firmly. "I've worked with you for over a year. I've seen you handle nightmare customers, kitchen disasters, staff drama, health inspections, all of it. You're not some clueless kid who fell into this. You've been learning the business from the ground up without even knowing that's what you were doing. Your grandfather was smart. He set you up to succeed." I wanted to believe her. Wanted to feel the confidence that seemed to come so naturally to people like Vanessa, who'd been forced to grow up fast and figure things out on their own. But all I could think about was my father's sneer, my mother's fury, Derek's calculating expression as he'd left the conference room. They weren't going to make this easy. They were going to do everything in their power to prove I wasn't capable, wasn't worthy, wasn't the right choice. Nina called as I was nearing the restaurant. I could see it up ahead, the copper sign gleaming in the afternoon light. The Copper Kettle, my grandfather's first restaurant, his pride and joy, his gift to me. I answered the call as I stopped across the street, just looking at it. "The lawyers called," Nina said without preamble. "Told me everything. Told me you're my new boss." Her voice was unreadable, and my stomach dropped. "I should have called you first," I said quickly. "I should have, I don't know, handled this better. I'm sorry, Nina. I didn't know any of this was coming." She laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "Claire, stop. I'm not mad. I'm happy for you. Harold was a good man and a brilliant businessman. If he chose you, he had his reasons. The question is, what happens now?" I crossed the street, still holding the phone to my ear. "Can we talk inside? I think I need to see it. Need to really see it, knowing what I know now." When I walked through the door, Nina was waiting by the host stand. The lunch service was over but the dinner prep hadn't started yet, so the dining room was empty. She studied my face for a long moment, then pulled me into a quick hug. "You look overwhelmed," she observed. "I feel overwhelmed," I admitted. "Nina, I don't know the first thing about running a restaurant. I can wait tables and work the register, but ownership? Management? Business decisions? I'm completely lost." She guided me to a booth and slid in across from me. "Okay, first things first. Take a breath. You're not expected to know everything immediately. Harold left detailed notes apparently, Margaret Chen already called me to coordinate, and you have staff who've been doing this for years. Me included. We can teach you what you need to know. But what if I screw it up?" The question came out smaller than I'd intended. What if I make some terrible decision and ruin everything my grandfather built? Nina's expression was serious but kind. "Then you'll learn from it and make better decisions next time. That's what business ownership is, Claire. It's making choices, some good, some bad, and constantly adapting. Your grandfather didn't build this place by being perfect. He built it by being willing to work hard and learn from his mistakes. I looked around the restaurant, really seeing it for the first time as something that belonged to me. The copper light fixtures that had been custom made by a local artisan. The exposed brick walls that my grandfather had apparently insisted on preserving when he'd renovated the space 15 years ago. The open kitchen design that let customers watch their food being prepared, a touch that had been innovative when he'd implemented it. Every detail had a story, a reason, a piece of my grandfather's vision embedded in it. And now it was my job to honor that vision while making it my own. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing and exhilarating in equal measure. Nina let me sit with my thoughts for a moment before speaking again. Your family is going to come after you. You know that, right? They're going to try to make you doubt yourself, maybe even try to sabotage the business to prove you can't handle it. I know, I said quietly. My father basically promised as much before he left. Said I'd run it into the ground within a year. Then we make sure that doesn't happen. Nina's voice had taken on a steely quality. We document everything. We keep meticulous records. We make smart decisions and we protect what's ours. Because it is ours now, Claire. This restaurant, these recipes, this legacy. Your grandfather gave it to you, but everyone who works here has invested themselves in making it successful. We're not going to let your family destroy that. The door chimed and Vanessa walked in, still in her street clothes since her shift wasn't scheduled to start for another hour. She spotted us in the booth and headed over. I couldn't wait, she said, sliding in beside Nina. I need to hear everything. And also, we need to celebrate. Your dead grandfather just made you a restaurant owner. That's either incredibly awesome or incredibly terrifying. Both, I said with a weak laugh. Definitely both. Vanessa grinned. Well, lucky for you, you've got a whole team of people who know how to run this place and who actually like you, which is more than most new owners can say. She paused, her expression growing more serious. But real talk, what's your plan? Because your brother is already posting about the will reading. My stomach clenched. What's he saying? Vanessa pulled out her phone and pulled up Derek's social media. He'd posted a video, filmed in his car, his expression one of wounded disbelief. Just left the reading of my grandfather's will, he said to the camera. And I have to say, I'm shocked and disappointed by what I heard today. My grandfather, who built an incredible business empire through hard work and family values, decided to leave the majority of his legacy to someone who walked away from the family. Someone who rejected everything he stood for. He shook his head sadly. I love my sister, but this decision is going to hurt a lot of people. Employees, loyal family members, everyone who dedicated themselves to building what he created. I can only hope that in time, she'll see reason and do what's right. The comments were already flooding in. Thousands of them, most sympathetic to Derek, painting me as the ungrateful sister who'd swooped in to steal an inheritance I didn't deserve. A few defended me, pointing out that if my grandfather had wanted Derek to have the business, he would have left it to him. But those voices were drowned out by the tide of support for my brother's narrative. He's already controlling the story, Nina observed. Making himself the victim and you the villain. Classic manipulation tactic. I felt sick. 3 million people had watched him humiliate me at the restaurant. Now probably even more would watch him paint this picture of me as a thief, stealing from my own family. He wasn't just attacking me anymore. He was attacking my grandfather's decision, questioning his judgment, turning public opinion against me before I'd even had a chance to process what had happened. I need to respond, I said, but even as I spoke, I knew it was the wrong move. Anything I said would just fuel the fire, give him more content to twist and use against me. My phone buzzed with another call from my mother. Then another text from a number I didn't recognize, this one calling me names I won't repeat. No, Vanessa said firmly. You don't respond to him. You don't engage. That's what he wants, more drama for content. Instead, you do exactly what you've been doing. You work. You learn the business. You prove through your actions that your grandfather made the right choice. Nina nodded in agreement. She's right. Derek can say whatever he wants online. But at the end of the day, you're the one with the restaurant. You're the one with the recipes and the trust fund and the legacy. He's just making videos. Let your success be the response. But what if people start boycotting the restaurant because of what he's saying? The thought had just occurred to me, and it made my blood run cold. What if his followers decide to leave bad reviews or spread rumors or, I don't know, actively try to hurt the business? Then we deal with it, Nina said calmly. But I don't think it'll come to that. Derek's followers are mostly interested in entertainment and drama. They're not going to organize some kind of campaign against a small Portland restaurant. And the people who actually eat here, our regular customers, they know us. They know the quality of our food and our service. They're not going to be swayed by some influencer's family drama. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to trust that everything would work out, that my grandfather's faith in me hadn't been misplaced. But sitting in that booth, looking at the restaurant that was now my responsibility, watching the notifications continue to pile up on my phone, I felt more uncertain than I'd ever felt in my life. The door chimed again, and this time an older couple walked in, regulars I recognized from my shifts. They spotted me and smiled, waving as they took their usual table by the window. Nina stood up to greet them, falling easily into her role as manager and host. Vanessa squeezed my shoulder before heading to the back to change into her work clothes. And I sat there alone in the booth, my grandfather's journal in the briefcase beside me, his letter folded in my purse, his legacy weighing on my shoulders like an anchor and a crown all at once. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out what came next. Tomorrow I'd have to start learning about profit margins and supplier contracts and health codes and all the million details that went into running a successful restaurant. Tomorrow I'd have to face whatever new attacks my family had planned, whatever fresh humiliation Derek was cooking up for his followers, whatever legal challenges my parents were preparing to throw at me. But today, right now, I just needed to sit with the enormity of what had happened. My grandfather had looked at me, at all his options, at everything he'd built over 50 years of hard work and sacrifice, and he'd chosen me. Not because I was perfect or prepared or even particularly capable. But because he'd seen something in me worth betting on. I pulled out his letter and read it again, letting his words sink deeper this time. Real legacy isn't about money or property. It's about the lives you touch and the example you set. Outside, the afternoon was fading toward evening. Soon the dinner rush would start, and I'd need to decide whether to work my scheduled shift or take the night to process everything that had happened. But for now, in this quiet moment, I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years. I felt chosen. Protected. Believed in. My grandfather's final gift wasn't really the restaurant or the money or even the recipes. It was his unwavering faith that I was strong enough, capable enough, worthy enough to carry on what he'd started. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been right all along. The first week of ownership felt like drinking from a fire hose while someone kept turning up the pressure. Margaret Chin arrived Wednesday morning with 3 bankers' boxes full of financial records, supplier contacts, and operational documents that my grandfather had meticulously organized. She set up camp in the small office above the restaurant, spreading papers across every available surface. Your grandfather ran a tight ship, she explained, pointing to spreadsheets that tracked everything from food costs to employee retention rates. He believed in knowing every detail of the business. Not to micromanage, but to understand where problems might develop before they became crises. She handed me a leather folder. This is the current financial picture. Monthly revenue, operating expenses, profit margins, everything you need to understand the health of the business. I opened the folder and felt my head swim. Numbers jumped out at me, percentages and projections and terms I only half understood. The restaurant was profitable, that much was clear, but the complexity of maintaining that profitability was staggering. Food costs fluctuated with seasons and availability. Labor expenses had to be balanced against customer volume. Marketing budgets needed constant adjustment. Every decision created a ripple effect that touched a dozen other areas. Margaret must have seen the panic in my expression because she sat down beside me, her voice patient. "We're going to take this slowly. You don't need to master everything today. Right now, I just need you to understand the basics so you can make informed decisions. The deep dive into financial management can come later, once you're comfortable with day-to-day operations." We spent 6 hours going through the essentials. How to read a profit and loss statement. What the key performance indicators meant. Where the business was strong and where it needed attention. Margaret had been my grandfather's accountant for 3 decades, and she had stories about every line item, every financial decision, every risk he'd taken or avoided. When Harold opened this place, she told me during a coffee break, he had exactly $12,000 in savings and a loan from a bank that thought he was crazy. Everyone said downtown Portland was dying, that nobody wanted upscale casual dining, that he should stick to what he knew. She smiled at the memory. He proved them all wrong because he understood something they didn't. People don't just want food. They want an experience, a connection, a reason to gather. That's what he built here. By Thursday, word had spread through the Portland restaurant community that the Copper Kettle had new ownership. 3 competitors called to introduce themselves and subtly probe for information about my plans. 2 food bloggers reached out requesting interviews. A supplier who'd worked with my grandfather for 20 years stopped by personally to assure me that their partnership would continue seamlessly. But the outside interest also brought unwanted attention. Derek posted another video, this one filmed outside the Copper Kettle during dinner service. "Look at this place," he said to his camera, panning across the exterior. My grandfather's first restaurant, his baby, the foundation of everything he built. And now it's in the hands of someone who has no business experience, no culinary training, no real understanding of what it takes to run an operation like this. A couple walking past stopped to watch him film, curious about what was happening. Derek played it up, turning on the charm. "You guys ever eaten here?" The couple nodded. "It's great," the woman said. "Best risotto in Portland." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, enjoy it while it lasts. New ownership tends to change things, and not always for the better. I hope my sister doesn't run this place into the ground, but statistics show that most restaurants fail within the first year under new management." Nina showed me the video during the dinner rush, her tablet propped on the bar where we could both see it. "He's standing on the sidewalk trying to tank your business," she said, her voice tight with anger. "We need to do something about this." But what could I do? Confront him and give him more content? Call the police for standing on a public sidewalk? Any reaction would just feed into his narrative that I was unstable, unable to handle criticism, proving his point that I wasn't capable of running the business. Instead, I focused on what I could control. I started arriving at the restaurant 2 hours before opening, learning the morning routine from Nina and the kitchen staff. How the bread was prepared, how produce orders were checked for quality, how the dining room was set up to maximize flow and efficiency. I worked every position I could, from prep cook to dishwasher, understanding each role's challenges and importance. The staff watched me carefully those first few days, trying to figure out what kind of owner I'd be. Would I change everything? Fire people to cut costs? Sell the restaurant to a corporate chain? I could see the questions in their eyes even when they didn't voice them directly. So I called a staff meeting Friday afternoon, gathering everyone in the dining room before dinner service. "I know this transition has been unsettling," I started, looking around at the 15 people who kept the Copper Kettle running. "I know you're wondering what's going to change and whether your jobs are safe. So I want to be direct with you. My grandfather left me this restaurant because he believed I understood what it meant to him. What it should mean. And the most important thing he taught me was that a restaurant is its people." I pulled out the journal Margaret had given me and opened it to a page I'd marked. My grandfather wrote this 20 years ago. He said, "I've learned that the secret to a successful restaurant isn't the location or the menu or even the ambience, though those things matter. The secret is treating your staff like the professionals they are, paying them fairly, respecting their expertise, and creating an environment where they want to come to work. Do that, and everything else follows." The head chef, a man named Carlos who'd been with my grandfather for 15 years, spoke up. "So you're not planning to clean house?" Bring in your own people? I shook my head firmly. The opposite. You're all the reason this place works. I'd be an idiot to mess with that. What I want to do is learn from you. Understand what you need to do your jobs better. And make this restaurant even more successful than it already is. I could see some of the tension drain from the room. Vanessa, who'd been standing near the back, caught my eye and gave me a small nod of approval. But I wasn't finished. I also want you to know that my family is probably going to try to cause problems. My brother has already posted videos trying to undermine confidence in the restaurant. My parents might spread rumors or try to interfere with our operations. If anyone approaches you, asking questions about me or the business or trying to get you to say negative things, please come to me directly. One of the servers, a college student named Tyler, raised his hand hesitantly. Is it true they're contesting the will? That they might be able to take the restaurant back? Margaret, who joined us for the meeting, answered before I could. They can try, but they won't succeed. The will is legally sound, and Claire is the rightful owner. Whatever noise her family makes, it's just that. Noise. The meeting seemed to settle everyone's nerves, and the dinner service that night had an energy I hadn't felt before. People worked with a renewed sense of purpose, and I caught Carlos actually smiling as he plated dishes, something Nina told me later was relatively rare. Maybe they were starting to believe this could work. Maybe I was starting to believe it too. Saturday brought the first real crisis. I arrived at 6 in the morning to find graffiti sprayed across the front windows. Not the artistic kind, but crude words and accusations. Thief. Fraud. Fake. The paint was still wet, dripping down the glass in ugly streaks. My hands shook as I called Nina, then the police, then the cleaning company that handled our maintenance. While I waited for everyone to arrive, I stood on the sidewalk staring at the vandalism. This was more than random property damage. Someone had targeted us specifically, used words designed to connect to the narrative Derek was spreading online. The timing was too convenient, coming right after his latest video had gone viral with over 5 million views. The police took a report but weren't optimistic about finding who did it. Happens more than you'd think with small businesses, the officer said, scribbling notes on his tablet. Especially when there's family drama or social media attention. We'll check security cameras in the area, but honestly, these cases are hard to solve. The cleaning crew managed to remove most of the paint before we opened, but you could still see faint traces if you knew where to look. I posted a simple statement on the restaurant's social media, keeping it factual and professional. The Copper Kettle experienced some vandalism last night. We've filed a police report and are working with authorities. We remain committed to providing excellent food and service to our community. Within an hour, Derek had screenshotted my post and added his own commentary. So sad to see what's happening to my grandfather's restaurant. When you inherit something you're not prepared for, situations like this become inevitable. I hope my sister realizes before it's too late that she's in over her head. The implication was clear. This was somehow my fault, proof that I couldn't handle the responsibility. But something unexpected happened. The vandalism seemed to galvanize support from our regular customers. People who'd been coming to the Copper Kettle for years started posting their own messages of support, sharing photos of their favorite dishes, writing reviews praising the food and service. A local food blogger wrote an article about the restaurant's history, my grandfather's legacy, and the importance of supporting local businesses during ownership transitions. By Sunday morning, we had a line of people waiting when we opened for brunch. Not because of the drama, but in spite of it. Or maybe because they wanted to show that Portland took care of its own. I worked the floor that day, taking orders and delivering food and thanking people for coming. And over, customers would squeeze my hand or pat my shoulder and tell me to hang in there, that they believed in me, that my grandfather would be proud. Monday morning, Margaret arrived with news. Your parents filed the contest, she said, setting her briefcase on the office desk. Gerald Stevenson submitted papers claiming undue influence and diminished capacity. It's all standard legal maneuvering, nothing we didn't expect. Thomas Whitmore is already preparing our response. How long will this take? I asked, feeling exhausted just thinking about months or years of legal battles. Margaret shrugged. Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. Depends on how aggressive they want to be and how much money they're willing to spend on legal fees. But here's what you need to understand. While this plays out, you remain in control. The will is being executed as written until a court says otherwise, which they won't. That afternoon, I met with James Morrison to go over the other restaurants in my grandfather's portfolio. He'd owned 15 locations at the time of his death, though he'd sold off 3 in the months before he passed away. The remaining 12 were all professionally managed, operating independently but under the larger Bennett Restaurant Group umbrella. These all go to the family trust, James explained, showing me the organizational charts. Your grandfather set up a complicated structure years ago, before you were born. The trust distributes profits to family members but keeps the actual ownership of most assets separate. The Copper Kettle was different. He owned it personally, completely outside the trust, which is why he could leave it to you without any strings attached. So my family still controls the other restaurants? James nodded. Your father is the primary trustee, your mother and brother are beneficiaries. They'll continue to receive distributions from the trust's profits. What they won't get is this restaurant or the recipes your grandfather specifically designated for you. Speaking of the recipes, he pulled out another folder. Your grandfather's collection is actually quite valuable. Several of his signature dishes have been featured in regional and national publications. There's been interest from food companies wanting to license some items for retail sale. You now control those decisions. It was overwhelming, realizing how many moving pieces there were to my inheritance. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was intellectual property, business relationships, legacy considerations, and family dynamics all tangled together in ways I was only beginning to understand. That evening, I finally opened my grandfather's journal and started reading from the beginning. His first entry was dated 1974, when he'd bought the Copper Kettle. Today I became a restaurant owner, he'd written in his precise handwriting. Paid $32,000 for a failing diner that most people said wasn't worth half that. But I see what it could be. Location is perfect, bones are good, and I've got ideas that Portland hasn't seen before. He documented everything. His decision to focus on fresh, local ingredients before farm to table was trendy. His choice to create an open kitchen so customers could see their food being prepared. His struggles with difficult suppliers, demanding landlords, cash flow problems that nearly broke him 3 times in the first year. But he'd also recorded his victories. The first time a customer told him the meal had made their day. The night they had a 2-hour wait and had to turn people away. The moment he'd paid off his initial loan and owned the restaurant free and clear. Reading his words, I felt connected to him in a way I hadn't even when he was alive. This journal wasn't just business notes. It was his heart, his philosophy, his understanding of what really mattered. And on nearly every page, he came back to the same themes. Respect your staff. Honor your ingredients. Create experiences, not just meals. Stay true to what you believe even when it would be easier to compromise. Tuesday morning brought another crisis, though this one was more subtle. Carlos pulled me aside during prep, his expression troubled. We've got a problem with the seafood supplier. They're saying they need cash on delivery now instead of our usual 30-day terms. I called to ask why, and the guy got weird, said something about new ownership and policy changes. I felt my stomach drop. How many other suppliers might be getting nervous about extending credit to a new owner, especially one whose family was publicly fighting over the inheritance? Margaret and I spent the afternoon calling every major supplier, reassuring them that our payment history was solid, that nothing about our financial situation had changed, that the will contest didn't affect our ability to operate. Most were understanding, but 2 other suppliers had also quietly shifted to more restrictive terms. It wasn't aggressive enough to shut us down, but it definitely added stress to our cash flow management. This is a pressure tactic, Margaret said grimly. Someone is calling your suppliers, raising doubts about your stability. It's subtle enough to have deniability but disruptive enough to cause problems. My father, I said, suddenly certain. He still has relationships with all these companies through the other restaurants. He could be suggesting they protect themselves, planting seeds of doubt. Margaret's expression confirmed my suspicion. Probably. But there's not much we can do about it except prove him wrong. Pay on time, maintain quality, keep the business running smoothly. Eventually, the suppliers will see that you're reliable regardless of what anyone says. Wednesday was the first time I saw my mother since the wool reading. I was at a farmer's market that the Copper Kettle had contracted with for produce, walking through the stalls and talking to farmers about seasonal availability. I turned a corner and there she was, examining heirloom tomatoes at a vendor's booth. She looked up and our eyes met across the crowded market. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she set down the tomato she'd been holding and walked over. Her expression was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "We should talk," she said quietly. "Somewhere private." Against my better judgment, I followed her to a coffee shop on the edge of the market. We sat at a table in the back corner, 2 cups of coffee neither of us touched between us. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," she started, her voice low but intense. "If you just agree to sell the restaurant back to the family, we could end all of this. The legal contest, the publicity, the tension. You'd walk away with a fair price and your dignity intact. The restaurant stays in the family where it belongs, and everyone moves on." I studied her face, looking for any hint of genuine concern or affection. But all I saw was calculation, the same expression she'd worn my entire childhood whenever she was maneuvering to get what she wanted. "It doesn't belong to the family," I said carefully. "It belongs to me. Grandpa Harold made that choice deliberately. He wanted me to have it." My mother's jaw tightened. He was sick and confused. He'd just lost his wife, was dealing with his heart condition, probably wasn't thinking clearly. That restaurant represents his life's work, Claire. His legacy. And you're treating it like some kind of prize you won. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "I'm treating it exactly how he wanted me to. With respect, with care, with an understanding of what it really means. Not as an asset to be managed from a distance or a line item on a balance sheet. As a living business that matters to the people who work there and the community it serves." She shook her head, frustration finally showing through her controlled exterior. "You always were so idealistic. So convinced that your way was morally superior. But idealism doesn't pay the bills, Claire. It doesn't maintain a business through tough times. It doesn't protect you when things go wrong." I stood up, done with this conversation. Grandpa Harold built an empire on idealism and hard work. I think I'll trust his example over your cynicism. Take care, Mom. I walked out before she could respond, my heart pounding but my head clear. Every interaction with my family just reinforced why I'd left in the first place. They saw the world as something to be controlled and exploited, not something to be part of. My grandfather had remembered what it meant to build something real, and he'd chosen to trust me with that understanding. I wasn't going to let them corrupt it or take it away. Thursday brought unexpected good news. A producer from a local television show called, asking if they could feature the Copper Kettle in an episode about historic Portland restaurants. Normally we'd have jumped at the exposure, Nina said, bringing me the message. But given everything happening with your family, I wanted to check with you first. Make sure you're comfortable being in the spotlight right now. I thought about it for a moment. Derek would definitely use it as more content, probably criticize everything from my on-camera presence to the way I described the food. But running from publicity felt like letting him win, like accepting his narrative that I had something to hide or be ashamed of. Let's do it, I decided. Grandpa Harold built this place to share great food with people. That doesn't change because my family can't accept his choices. The filming was scheduled for the following week, which gave me just enough time to thoroughly panic about being on camera. But it also gave me something to focus on besides legal battles and family drama. Something positive and forward-looking that celebrated what the Copper Kettle was rather than dwelling on the controversy surrounding its inheritance. Friday afternoon, I was going through vendor contracts in the office when Vanessa knocked on the door frame. You've got a visitor, she said, her expression unreadable. He says he's a friend of your grandfather's. An older man stood in the dining room, probably in his 70s, wearing a well-worn flannel shirt and jeans. He had the weathered look of someone who'd spent their life working with their hands, and when he saw me, his face broke into a warm smile. "You must be Claire," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Frank Moretti. I used to supply your grandfather with produce back when he first opened this place. Heard about the inheritance and wanted to stop by, see how you were holding up." We talked for over an hour, Frank sharing stories about the early days of the Copper Kettle. How my grandfather used to meet him at the farmer's market at 5 in the morning to hand-select vegetables. How he'd experiment with recipes, sometimes successfully and sometimes disastrously, but always with passion and dedication. How he'd treated every staff member, supplier, and customer with genuine respect and interest. "Your grandfather once told me," Frank said as he was preparing to leave, "that the thing he was most proud of wasn't the restaurants or the money or the success. It was that he'd stayed true to himself through all of it. Never compromised his values for convenience. Never forgot where he came from." He looked at me intently. "He saw that same quality in you, Claire. That's why he gave you this place. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." After Frank left, I sat in the empty dining room and let his words sink in. My family was trying to break me down, to make me doubt myself and my grandfather's faith in me. But people like Frank, like the regular customers, like the staff, they were reminding me why this mattered. Why fighting for it was worth the cost. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Whitmore. "Initial hearing on the will contest is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. We're ready. Are you?" I looked around the restaurant, at the copper fixtures catching the late afternoon light, at the menu board listing dishes my grandfather had perfected over decades, at the kitchen where Carlos was already prepping for dinner service. I typed back a simple response. "Yes. I'm ready." The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more like a conference room with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that hummed quietly overhead. My family sat on one side with Gerald Stevenson and 2 junior attorneys. I sat on the other with Thomas Whitmore, Margaret Chen, and James Morrison. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Patricia Greenwald, reviewed documents while we waited in tense silence. My mother wouldn't look at me. My father stared straight ahead, his expression carved from stone. But Derek kept glancing over, and I could see his phone partially hidden under the table. Still creating content, even here. Still turning every moment into something he could monetize. Gerald Stevenson presented his case first, arguing that my grandfather had been under emotional distress after losing his wife, that his heart medication could have affected his judgment, that the will represented a departure from decades of estate planning that had always centered on family unity. He made it sound reasonable, almost caring, like they were protecting my grandfather's true wishes from a moment of weakness. Then Thomas Whitmore stood up. He didn't raise his voice or use dramatic gestures. He simply presented fact after fact. Medical evaluations from 2 independent physicians confirming my grandfather's mental competence. Testimony from Margaret Chen about detailed conversations regarding his intentions. Records showing he'd been planning this distribution for over a year, revising and refining it, making sure every detail was legally sound. But the moment that changed everything came when Whitmore played a video. "Your Honor," my grandfather's voice filled the courtroom from speakers. "I'm recording this to make my intentions absolutely clear. I am of sound mind and body. I know exactly what I'm doing and why. My granddaughter Claire has shown me something I'd almost forgotten. That integrity matters more than image. That honest work has dignity regardless of status. That family means supporting each other, not controlling each other. I'm leaving her the Copper Kettle because she earned it. Not through birthright or obligation, but through her choices and character. The rest of my family has forgotten what built our success. They've become managers of wealth rather than creators of value. Claire remembers. Or maybe she never forgot. Either way, she deserves this legacy because she'll honor what it truly represents." The video was dated 6 months before his death. My grandfather looked frail, but his voice was strong, his eyes clear. There was no confusion, no hesitation. Just absolute certainty about what he wanted and why. When it finished, Judge Greenwald looked at Gerald Stevenson. "Do you have any evidence that contradicts what we've just seen and heard?" Stevenson tried to argue that the video itself proved nothing, that emotional distress could still have influenced the decision even if my grandfather appeared lucid. But Judge Greenwald cut him off. "I've reviewed all the medical records, the testimonies, and the timeline of estate planning. I find no evidence of diminished capacity or undue influence. The will stands as written. This contest is dismissed." My mother made a sound like she'd been struck. My father's face went red. Derek actually stood up, his phone now openly recording. "This is ridiculous," he said loudly. "You can't just ignore decades of family planning because of one video." The judge's gaze snapped to him. "Young man, I can and I have. And if you don't put that phone away and sit down immediately, I'll hold you in contempt." Derek sat, but the damage was done. He'd gotten his content, his moment of outrage for his followers. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. Derek pushed past me to get to them first, already spinning his narrative about judicial overreach and family betrayal. But I didn't care anymore. The legal battle was over. The restaurant was mine, unquestionably and permanently. 3 months later, the Copper Kettle had its best quarter in 5 years. The television feature had brought in new customers while our regulars stayed loyal. We'd expanded the menu using some of my grandfather's archived recipes, each one tested and refined by Carlos until it met his exacting standards. The staff had fully embraced the transition, bringing ideas and energy that made the restaurant feel alive in ways I was still discovering. Derek's followers had mostly moved on to other drama. He still posted occasionally about the injustice of it all, but the views kept dropping. Turns out people get bored when the story doesn't change. My parents had stopped trying to interfere, though they'd also stopped speaking to me entirely. I told myself I was fine with that. Most days I even believed it. The evening of our biggest success came quietly. No cameras, no announcements, just a full dining room and a kitchen running like a well-oiled machine. I was working the floor, checking on tables and chatting with customers, when Frank Moretti came in with his wife. They insisted I sit with them for a few minutes, and Frank raised his wine glass. "To Harold," he said simply. And to the granddaughter who understood what he was really giving her. Not just a building or a business, but a chance to build something meaningful. We clinked glasses, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do. Later that night, after we'd closed and the staff had gone home, I stood in the empty dining room with Nina. She was reviewing the night's numbers, pleased with how smoothly everything had run. "You know what your grandfather would say right now?" she asked. I smiled, already knowing. "He'd say the numbers are great, but did people leave happy?" Nina laughed. "Exactly. And the answer is yes. They left very happy." She closed her tablet and looked at me seriously. "You've done something remarkable here, Claire. You took an inheritance that could have destroyed you and turned it into something stronger than it was before. That takes guts." I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation of Derek's videos, the pain of my family's rejection, the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly owning a business I barely understood. But I also thought about the community I'd found, the skills I'd developed, the confidence I'd built from proving I could do this. My grandfather's journal sat in the office upstairs, and I'd started adding my own entries. Recording lessons learned, decisions made, hopes for the future. Maybe someday someone would read them and understand what this place meant. What it took to protect it. What it gave back to those willing to fight for it. I locked the front door and stood on the sidewalk, looking at the Copper Kettle's sign glowing in the darkness. Derek could keep his followers and his content. My parents could keep their bitterness and their control. I had something better. Something real. Something mine. And that was worth more than all of them combined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.